Chapters 92 through 95 of Human Bondage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tom Weiss. Of Human Bondage by W. Somerset Maugham. Chapter 92. The following day was Tuesday. Philip, as usual, hurried through his breakfast and dashed off to get to his lecture at 9. He had only time to exchange a few words with Mildred. When he came back in the evening, he found her seated at the window, darning his socks. "I say, you are industrious," he smiled. "What have you been doing with yourself all day?" "Oh, I gave the place a good cleaning, and then I took baby out for a little." She was wearing an old black dress, the same as she had worn as uniform when she served in the tea shop. It was shabby, but she looked better in it than in the silk of the day before. The baby was sitting on the floor. She looked up at Philip with large, mysterious eyes, and broke into a laugh when he sat down beside her and began playing with her bare toes. The afternoon sun came into the room and shed a mellow light. "It's rather jolly to come back and find someone about the place. A woman and a baby make very good decoration in a room." He had gone to the hospital dispensary and got a bottle of Blaud's pills. He gave them to Mildred and told her she must take them after each meal. It was a remedy she was used to, for she had taken it off and on ever since she was 16. "I'm sure Lawson would love that green skin of yours," said Philip. "He'd say it was so paintable, but I'm terribly matter-of-fact nowadays, and I shan't be angry till you're as pink and white as a milkmaid." "I feel better already." After a frugal supper, Philip filled his pouch with tobacco and put on his hat. It was on Tuesdays that he generally went to the tavern in Beak Street, and he was glad that this day came so soon after Mildred's arrival, for he wanted to make his relations with her perfectly clear. "Are you going out?" she said. "Yes, on Tuesdays I give myself a night off. I shall see you tomorrow. Good night." Philip always went to the tavern with a sense of pleasure. McAllister, the philosophic stockbroker, was generally there and glad to argue upon any subject under the sun. Hayward came regularly when he was in London, and though he and McAllister disliked one another, they continued out of habit to meet on that one evening in the week. McAllister thought Hayward a poor creature and sneered at his delicacies of sentiment. He asked satirically about Hayward's literary work, and received with scornful smiles his vague suggestions of future masterpieces. Their arguments were often heated, but the punch was good, and they were both fond of it. Towards the end of the evening they generally composed their differences and thought each other capital fellows. This evening Philip found them both there, and Lawson also. Lawson came more seldom now that he was beginning to know people in London, and went out to dinner a good deal. They were all on excellent terms with themselves, for McAllister had given them a good thing on the Stock Exchange, and Hayward and Lawson had made £50 apiece. It was a great thing for Lawson, who was extravagant and earned little money. He had arrived at that stage of the portrait painter's career when he was noticed a good deal by the critics, and found a number of aristocratic ladies who were willing to allow him to paint them for nothing. It advertised them both, and gave the great ladies quite an air of patronesses of the arts. But he very seldom got hold of the solid Philistine who was ready to pay good money for a portrait of his wife. Lawson was brimming over with satisfaction. "It's the most ripping way of making money that I've ever struck," he cried. "I didn't have to put my hand in my pocket for sixpence." "You lost something by not being here last Tuesday, young man," said McAllister to Philip. "My God, why didn't you write to me?" said Philip. "If you only knew how useful £100 would be to me." "Oh, there wasn't time for that. One has to be on the spot. I heard of a good thing last Tuesday, and I asked these fellows if they'd like to have a flutter. I bought them 1,000 shares on Wednesday morning, and there was a rise in the afternoon, so I sold them at once. I made £50 for each of them, and a couple of hundred for myself." Philip was sick with envy. He had recently sold the last mortgage in which his small fortune had been invested, and now had only £600 left. He was panic-stricken sometimes when he thought of the future. He had still to keep himself for 2 years before he could be qualified, and then he meant to try for hospital appointments, so that he could not expect to earn anything for 3 years at least. With the most rigid economy he would not have more than £100 left then. It was very little to have as a stand-by in case he was ill and could not earn money, or found himself at any time without work. A lucky gamble would make all the difference to him. "Oh, well, it doesn't matter," said Macalister. "Something is sure to turn up soon. There'll be a boom in South Africans again one of these days, and then I'll see what I can do for you." Macalister was in the Kaffir market, and often told them stories of the sudden fortunes that had been made in the great boom year of a year or two back. "Well, don't forget next time." They sat on talking till nearly midnight, and Philip, who lived furthest off, was the first to go. If he did not catch the last tram he had to walk, and that made him very late. As it was, he did not reach home till nearly 12:30. When he got upstairs he was surprised to find Mildred still sitting in his arm-chair. "Why on earth aren't you in bed?" he cried. "I wasn't sleeping." "You ought to go to bed all the same. It would rest you." She did not move. He noticed that since supper she had changed into her black silk dress. "I thought I'd rather wait up for you in case you wanted anything." She looked at him, and the shadow of a smile played upon her thin pale lips. Philip was not sure whether he understood or not. He was slightly embarrassed, but assumed a cheerful, matter-of-fact air. "It's very nice of you, but it's very naughty also. Run off to bed as fast as you can, or you won't be able to get up tomorrow morning." "I don't feel like going to bed." "Nonsense," he said coldly. She got up a little sulkily and went into her room. He smiled when he heard her lock the door loudly. The next few days passed without incident. Mildred settled down in her new surroundings. When Philip hurried off after breakfast, she had the whole morning to do the housework. They ate very simply, but she liked to take a long time to buy the few things they needed. She could not be bothered to cook anything for her dinner, but made herself some cocoa and ate bread and butter. Then she took the baby out in the go-cart, and when she came in spent the rest of the afternoon in idleness. She was tired out, and it suited her to do so little. She made friends with Philip's forbidding landlady over the rent, which he left with Mildred to pay, and within a week was able to tell him more about his neighbours than he had learned in a year. "She's a very nice woman," said Mildred. "Quite the lady. I told her we was married." "Do you think that was necessary?" "Well, I had to tell her something. It looks so funny me being here and not married to you. I didn't know what she'd think of me." "I don't suppose she believed you for a moment." "That she did, I lay. I told her we'd been married 2 years. I had to say that, you know, because of baby. Only your people wouldn't hear of it because you was only a student." She pronounced it "stoodent." "And so we had to keep it a secret, but they'd given way now, and we were all going down to stay with them in the summer." "You're a past mistress of the cock and bull story," said Philip. He was vaguely irritated that Mildred still had this passion for telling fibs. In the last 2 years she had learnt nothing. But he shrugged his shoulders. "Well, all said and done," he reflected, "she hasn't had much chance." It was a beautiful evening, warm and cloudless, and the people of South London seemed to have poured out into the streets. There was that restlessness in the air which seizes the Cockney sometimes when a turn in the weather calls him into the open. After Mildred had cleared away the supper she went and stood at the window. The street noises came to them, noises of people calling to one another, of the passing traffic, of a barrel organ in the distance. "I suppose you must work tonight, Philip?" she asked him, with a wistful expression. "I ought, but I don't know that I must. Why, do you want me to do anything else?" "I'd like to go out for a bit. Couldn't we take a ride on the top of a tram?" "If you like." "I'll just go and put on my hat," she said joyfully. The night made it almost impossible to stay indoors. The baby was asleep and could be safely left. Mildred said she always left it alone at night when she went out. It never woke. She was in high spirits when she came back with her hat on. She had taken the opportunity to put on a little rouge. Philip thought it was excitement which had brought a faint colour to her pale cheeks. He was touched by her childlike delight, and reproached himself for the austerity with which he had treated her. She laughed when she got out into the air. The first tram they saw was going towards Westminster Bridge, and they got on it. Philip smoked his pipe, and they looked at the crowded street. The shops were open, gaily lit, and people were doing their shopping for the next day. They passed a music hall called the Canterbury, and Mildred cried out, "Oh, Philip, do let's go there. I haven't been to a music hall for months." "We can't afford stalls, you know." "Oh, I don't mind. I shall be quite happy in the gallery." They got down and walked back 100 yards till they came to the doors. They got capital seats for 6 pence each, high up, but not in the gallery, and the night was so fine that there was plenty of room. Mildred's eyes glistened. She enjoyed herself thoroughly. There was a simple-mindedness in her which touched Philip. She was a puzzle to him. Certain things in her still pleased him, and he thought that there was a lot in her which was very good. She had been badly brought up, and her life was hard. He had blamed her for much that she could not help. And it was his own fault if he had asked virtues from her which it was not in her power to give. Under different circumstances she might have been a charming girl. She was extraordinarily unfit for the battle of life. As he watched her now in profile, her mouth slightly open and that delicate flush on her cheeks, he thought she looked strangely virginal. He felt an overwhelming compassion for her, and with all his heart he forgave her for the misery she had caused him. The smoky atmosphere made Philip's eyes ache, but when he suggested going, she turned to him with beseeching face and asked him to stay till the end. He smiled and consented. She took his hand and held it for the rest of the performance. When they streamed out with the audience into the crowded street, she did not want to go home. They wandered up the Westminster Bridge Road, looking at the people. "I've not had such a good time as this for months," she said. Philip's heart was full, and he was thankful to the fates because he had carried out his sudden impulse to take Mildred and her baby into his flat. It was very pleasant to see her happy gratitude. At last she grew tired, and they jumped on a tram to go home. It was late now, and when they got down and turned into their own street, there was no one about. Mildred slipped her arm through his. "It's just like old times, Phil," she said. She had never called him Phil before. That was what Griffiths called him, and even now it gave him a curious pang. He remembered how much he had wanted to die then. His pain had been so great that he had thought quite seriously of committing suicide. It all seemed very long ago. He smiled at his past self. Now he felt nothing for Mildred but infinite pity. They reached the house, and when they got into the sitting room, Philip lit the gas. "Is the baby all right?" he asked. "I'll just go in and see." When she came back it was to say that it had not stirred since she left it. It was a wonderful child. Philip held out his hand. "Well, good night." "Do you want to go to bed already?" "It's nearly 1. I'm not used to late hours these days," said Philip. She took his hand and holding it looked into his eyes with a little smile. "Phil, the other night in that room, when you asked me to come and stay here, I didn't mean what you thought I meant, when you said you didn't want me to be anything to you except just a cook and that sort of thing." "Didn't you?" asked Philip, withdrawing his hand. "I did." "Don't be such an old silly," she laughed. He shook his head. "I meant it quite seriously. I shouldn't have asked you to stay here on any other condition." "Why not?" "I feel I couldn't. I can't explain it, but it would spoil it all." She shrugged her shoulders. "Oh, very well, it's just as you choose. I'm not one to go down on my hands and knees for that and chance it." She went out, slamming the door behind her. Chapter 93. Next morning Mildred was sulky and taciturn. She remained in her room till it was time to get the dinner ready. She was a bad cook and could do little more than chops and steaks, and she did not know how to use up odds and ends, so that Philip was obliged to spend more money than he had expected. When she served up she sat down opposite Philip, but would eat nothing. He remarked on it. She said she had a bad headache and was not hungry. He was glad that he had somewhere to spend the rest of the day. The Athelnys were cheerful and friendly. It was a delightful and an unexpected thing to realise that everyone in that household looked forward with pleasure to his visit. Mildred had gone to bed when he came back, but next day she was still silent. At supper she sat with a haughty expression on her face and a little frown between her eyes. It made Philip impatient, but he told himself that he must be considerate to her. He was bound to make allowance. "You're very silent," he said, with a pleasant smile. "I'm paid to cook and clean. I didn't know I was expected to talk as well." He thought it an ungracious answer, but if they were going to live together he must do all he could to make things go easily. "I'm afraid you're cross with me about the other night," he said. It was an awkward thing to speak about, but apparently it was necessary to discuss it. "I don't know what you mean," she answered. "Please don't be angry with me. I should never have asked you to come and live here if I'd not meant our relations to be merely friendly. I suggested it because I thought you wanted a home and you would have a chance of looking about for something to do." "Oh, don't think I care." "I don't for a moment," he hastened to say. "You mustn't think I'm ungrateful. I realise that you only proposed it for my sake. It's just a feeling I have, and I can't help it. It would make the whole thing ugly and horrid." "You are funny," she said, looking at him curiously. "I can't make you out." She was not angry with him now, but puzzled. She had no idea what he meant. She accepted the situation. She had indeed a vague feeling that he was behaving in a very noble fashion, and that she ought to admire it. But also she felt inclined to laugh at him and perhaps even to despise him a little. "He's a rum customer," she thought. Life went smoothly enough with them. Philip spent all day at the hospital and worked at home in the evening except when he went to the Athelnys or to the tavern in Beak Street. Once the physician for whom he clerked asked him to a solemn dinner, and 2 or 3 times he went to parties given by fellow students. Mildred accepted the monotony of her life. If she minded that Philip left her sometimes by herself in the evening, she never mentioned it. Occasionally he took her to a music hall. He carried out his intention that the only tie between them should be the domestic service she did in return for board and lodging. She had made up her mind that it was no use trying to get work that summer, and with Philip's approval determined to stay where she was till the autumn. She thought it would be easy to get something to do then. "As far as I'm concerned you can stay on here until you've got a job if it's convenient. The room's there, and the woman who did for me before can come in to look after the baby." He grew very much attached to Mildred's child. He had a naturally affectionate disposition which had had little opportunity to display itself. Mildred was not unkind to the little girl. She looked after her very well, and once when she had a bad cold proved herself a devoted nurse. But the child bored her, and she spoke to her sharply when she bothered. She was fond of her, but had not the maternal passion which might have induced her to forget herself. Mildred had no demonstrativeness, and she found the manifestations of affection ridiculous. When Philip sat with the baby on his knees, playing with it and kissing it, she laughed at him. "You couldn't make more fuss of her if you was her father," she said. "You're perfectly silly with the child." Philip flushed, for he hated to be laughed at. It was absurd to be so devoted to another man's baby, and he was a little ashamed of the overflowing of his heart. But the child, feeling Philip's attachment, would put her face against his or nestle in his arms. "It's all very fine for you," said Mildred. "You don't have any of the disagreeable part of it. How would you like being kept awake for an hour in the middle of the night because her ladyship won't go to sleep?" Philip remembered all sorts of things of his childhood which he thought he had long forgotten. He took hold of the baby's toes. This little pig went to market. This little pig stayed at home. When he came home in the evening and entered the sitting room his first glance was for the baby sprawling on the floor, and it gave him a little thrill of delight to hear the child's crow of pleasure at seeing him. Mildred taught her to call him Daddy, and when the child did this for the first time of her own accord, laughed immoderately. "I wonder if you're that stuck on baby because she's mine," asked Mildred, "or if you'd be the same with anybody's baby." "I've never known anybody else's baby, so I can't say," said Philip. Towards the end of his second term as in-patients' clerk, a piece of good fortune befell Philip. It was the middle of July. He went one Tuesday evening to the tavern in Beak Street and found nobody there but Macalister. They sat together chatting about their absent friends, and after a while Macalister said to him: "Oh, by the way, I heard of a rather good thing today. New Kleinfonteins, it's a gold mine in Rhodesia. If you'd like to have a flutter, you might make a bit." Philip had been waiting anxiously for such an opportunity, but now that it came he hesitated. He was desperately afraid of losing money. He had little of the gambler's spirit. "I'd love to, but I don't know if I dare risk it. How much could I lose if things went wrong?" "I shouldn't have spoken of it, only you seemed so keen about it," Macalister answered coldly. Philip felt that Macalister looked upon him as rather a donkey. "I'm awfully keen on making a bit," he laughed. "You can't make money unless you're prepared to risk money." Macalister began to talk of other things, and Philip, while he was answering him, kept thinking that if the venture turned out well the stockbroker would be very facetious at his expense next time they met. Macalister had a sarcastic tongue. "I think I will have a flutter if you don't mind," said Philip anxiously. "All right, I'll buy you 250 shares, and if I see a half-crown rise I'll sell them at once." Philip quickly reckoned out how much that would amount to, and his mouth watered. £30 would be a godsend just then, and he thought the fates owed him something. He told Mildred what he had done when he saw her at breakfast the next morning. She thought him very silly. "I never knew anyone who made money on the Stock Exchange," she said. "That's what Emil always said. You can't expect to make money on the Stock Exchange, he said." Philip bought an evening paper on his way home and turned at once to the money columns. He knew nothing about these things and had difficulty in finding the stock which Macalister had spoken of. He saw they had advanced a quarter. His heart leaped, and then he felt sick with apprehension in case Macalister had forgotten or for some reason had not bought. Macalister had promised to telegraph. Philip could not wait to take a tram home. He jumped into a cab. It was an unwonted extravagance. "Is there a telegram for me?" he said, as he burst in. "No," said Mildred. His face fell, and in bitter disappointment he sank heavily into a chair. "Then he didn't buy them for me after all. Curse him," he added violently. "What cruel luck, and I've been thinking all day of what I'd do with the money." "Why, what were you going to do?" she asked. "What's the good of thinking about that now? Oh, I wanted the money so badly." She gave a laugh and handed him a telegram. "I was only having a joke with you. I opened it." He tore it out of her hands. Macalister had bought him 250 shares and sold them at the half-crown profit he had suggested. The commission note was to follow next day. For one moment Philip was furious with Mildred for her cruel jest, but then he could only think of his joy. "It makes such a difference to me," he cried. "I'll stand you a new dress if you like." "I wanted it badly enough," she answered. "I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to be operated upon at the end of July." "Why? Have you got something the matter with you?" she interrupted. It struck her that an illness she did not know might explain what had so much puzzled her. He flushed, for he hated to refer to his deformity. "No, but they think they can do something to my foot. I couldn't spare the time before, and now it doesn't matter so much. I shall start my dressing in October instead of next month. I shall only be in the hospital a few weeks, and then we can go away to the seaside for the rest of the summer. It'll do us all good, you and the baby and me." "Oh, let's go to Brighton, Philip. I like Brighton. You get such a nice class of people there." Philip had vaguely thought of some little fishing village in Cornwall, but as she spoke it occurred to him that Mildred would be bored to death there. "I don't mind where we go as long as I get the sea." He did not know why, but he had suddenly an irresistible longing for the sea. He wanted to bathe, and he thought with delight of splashing about in the salt water. He was a good swimmer, and nothing exhilarated him like a rough sea. "I say, it will be jolly," he cried. "It'll be like a honeymoon, won't it?" she said. "How much can I have for my new dress, Phil?" Chapter 94. Philip asked Mr. Jacobs, the assistant surgeon for whom he had dressed, to do the operation. Jacobs accepted with pleasure, since he was interested just then in neglected talipes and was getting together materials for a paper. He warned Philip that he could not make his foot like the other, but he thought he could do a good deal, and though he would always limp, he would be able to wear a boot less unsightly than that which he had been accustomed to. Philip remembered how he had prayed to a God who was able to remove mountains for him who had faith, and he smiled bitterly. "I don't expect a miracle," he answered. "I think you're wise to let me try what I can do. You'll find a club foot rather a handicap in practice. The layman is full of fads, and he doesn't like his doctor to have anything the matter with him." Philip went into a small ward, which was a room on the landing, outside each ward, reserved for special cases. He remained there a month, for the surgeon would not let him go till he could walk, and, bearing the operation very well, he had a pleasant enough time. Lawson and Athelny came to see him, and one day Mrs. Athelny brought two of her children. Students whom he knew looked in now and again to have a chat. Mildred came twice a week. Everyone was very kind to him, and Philip, always surprised when anyone took trouble with him, was touched and grateful. He enjoyed the relief from care. He need not worry there about the future, neither whether his money would last out nor whether he would pass his final examinations, and he could read to his heart's content. He had not been able to read much of late, since Mildred disturbed him. She would make an aimless remark when he was trying to concentrate his attention, and would not be satisfied unless he answered. Whenever he was comfortably settled down with a book, she would want something done and would come to him with a cork she could not draw or a hammer to drive in a nail. They settled to go to Brighton in August. Philip wanted to take lodgings, but Mildred said that she would have to do housekeeping, and it would only be a holiday for her if they went to a boarding house. "I have to see about the food every day at home. I get that sick of it I want a thorough change." Philip agreed, and it happened that Mildred knew of a boarding house at Kemp Town where they would not be charged more than 25 shillings a week each. She arranged with Philip to write about rooms, but when he got back to Kennington he found that she had done nothing. He was irritated. "I shouldn't have thought you had so much to do as all that," he said. "Well, I can't think of everything. It's not my fault if I forget, is it?" Philip was so anxious to get to the sea that he would not wait to communicate with the mistress of the boarding house. "We'll leave the luggage at the station and go to the house and see if they've got rooms. And if they have we can just send an outside porter for our traps." "You can please yourself," said Mildred stiffly. She did not like being reproached, and, retiring huffily into a haughty silence, she sat by listlessly while Philip made the preparations for their departure. The little flat was hot and stuffy under the August sun, and from the road beat up a malodorous sultriness. As he lay in his bed in the small ward with its red distempered walls, he had longed for fresh air and the splashing of the sea against his breast. He felt he would go mad if he had to spend another night in London. Mildred recovered her good temper when she saw the streets of Brighton crowded with people making holiday, and they were both in high spirits as they drove out to Kemp Town. Philip stroked the baby's cheek. "We shall get a very different colour into them when we've been down here a few days," he said, smiling. They arrived at the boarding house and dismissed the cab. An untidy maid opened the door and, when Philip asked if they had rooms, said she would inquire. she fetched her mistress. A middle-aged woman, stout and businesslike, came downstairs, gave them the scrutinizing glance of her profession, and asked what accommodation they required. 2 single rooms, and if you've got such a thing we'd rather like a cot in one of them. I'm afraid I haven't got that. I've got one nice large double room, and I could let you have a cot. I don't think that would do, said Philip. I could give you another room next week. Brighton's very full just now, and people have to take what they can get. If it were only for a few days, Philip, I think we might be able to manage, said Mildred. I think 2 rooms would be more convenient. Can you recommend any other place where they take boarders? I can, but I don't suppose they'd have room any more than I have. Perhaps you wouldn't mind giving me the address? The house the stout woman suggested was in the next street, and they walked towards it. Philip could walk quite well, though he had to lean on a stick, and he was rather weak. Mildred carried the baby. They went for a little in silence, and then he saw she was crying. It annoyed him, and he took no notice, but she forced his attention. "Lend me a hanky, will you? I can't get at mine with baby," she said in a voice strangled with sobs, turning her head away from him. He gave her his handkerchief, but said nothing. She dried her eyes, and as he did not speak, went on. "I might be poisonous." "Please don't make a scene in the street," he said. "It'll look so funny insisting on separate rooms like that. What'll they think of us?" "If they knew the circumstances, I imagine they'd think us surprisingly moral," said Philip. She gave him a sidelong glance. "You're not going to give it away that we're not married?" she asked quickly. "No." "Why won't you live with me as if we were married then?" "My dear, I can't explain. I don't want to humiliate you, but I simply can't. I daresay it's very silly and unreasonable, but it's stronger than I am. I loved you so much that now—" He broke off. "After all, there's no accounting for that sort of thing." "A fat lot you must have loved me!" she exclaimed. The boarding house to which they had been directed was kept by a bustling maiden lady, with shrewd eyes and voluble speech. They could have 1 double room for 25 shillings a week each, and 5 shillings extra for the baby, or they could have 2 single rooms for £1 a week more. "I have to charge that much more," the woman explained apologetically, "because if I'm pushed to it I can put 2 beds even in the single room. I daresay that won't ruin us. What do you think, Mildred?" "Oh, I don't mind. Anything's good enough for me," she answered. Philip passed off her sulky reply with a laugh, and then, the landlady having arranged to send for their luggage, they sat down to rest themselves. Philip's foot was hurting him a little, and he was glad to put it up on a chair. "I suppose you don't mind my sitting in the same room with you," said Mildred aggressively. "Don't let's quarrel, Mildred," he said gently. "I didn't know you was so well off you could afford to throw away £1 a week." "Don't be angry with me. I assure you it's the only way we can live together at all." "I suppose you despise me. That's it." "Of course I don't. Why should I?" "It's so unnatural." "Is it? You're not in love with me, are you?" "Me? What do you take me for?" "It's not as if you were a very passionate woman. You're not that." "It's so humiliating," she said sulkily. "Oh, I wouldn't fuss about that if I were you." There were about a dozen people in the boarding house. They ate in a narrow, dark room at a long table, at the head of which the landlady sat and carved. The food was bad. The landlady called it French cooking, by which she meant that the poor quality of the materials was disguised by ill-made sauces. Plaice masqueraded as sole, and New Zealand mutton as lamb. The kitchen was small and inconvenient, so that everything was served up lukewarm. The people were dull and pretentious: old ladies with elderly maiden daughters, funny old bachelors with mincing ways, pale-faced middle-aged clerks with wives who talked of their married daughters and their sons who were in a very good position in the colonies. At table they discussed Miss Corelli's latest novel. Some of them liked Lord Leighton better than Mr. Alma Tadema, and some of them liked Mr. Alma Tadema better than Lord Leighton. Mildred soon told the ladies of her romantic marriage with Philip, and he found himself an object of interest because his family, county people in a very good position, had cut him off with a shilling because he married while he was only a student. And Mildred's father, who had a large place down Devonshire way, wouldn't do anything for them because she had married Philip. That was why they had come to a boarding house and had not a nurse for the baby. But they had to have 2 rooms because they were both used to a good deal of accommodation, and they didn't care to be cramped. The other visitors also had explanations of their presence. One of the single gentlemen generally went to the Metropole for his holiday, but he liked cheerful company, and you couldn't get that at one of those expensive hotels. And the old lady with the middle-aged daughter was having her beautiful house in London done up, and she said to her daughter, "Gwenny, my dear, we must have a cheap holiday this year." And so they had come there, though of course it wasn't at all the kind of thing they were used to. Mildred found them all very superior, and she hated a lot of common, rough people. She liked gentlemen to be gentlemen in every sense of the word. "When people are gentlemen and ladies," she said, "I like them to be gentlemen and ladies." The remark seemed cryptic to Philip, but when he heard her say it 2 or 3 times to different persons and found that it aroused hearty agreement, he came to the conclusion that it was only obscure to his own intelligence. It was the first time that Philip and Mildred had been thrown entirely together. In London he did not see her all day, and when he came home the household affairs, the baby, the neighbours, gave them something to talk about till he settled down to work. Now he spent the whole day with her. After breakfast they went down to the beach. The morning went easily enough with a bath and a stroll along the front. The evening, which they spent on the pier, having put the baby to bed, was tolerable, for there was music to listen to and a constant stream of people to look at. Philip amused himself by imagining who they were and weaving little stories about them. He had got into the habit of answering Mildred's remarks with his mouth only, so that his thoughts remained undisturbed. But the afternoons were long and dreary. They sat on the beach. Mildred said they must get all the benefit they could out of Dr. Brighton, and he could not read because Mildred made observations frequently about things in general. If he paid no attention, she complained. "Oh, leave that silly old book alone. It can't be good for you always reading. You'll addle your brain, that's what you'll do, Philip." "Oh, rot," he answered. "Besides, it's so unsociable." He discovered that it was difficult to talk to her. She had not even the power of attending to what she was herself saying, so that a dog running in front of her or the passing of a man in a loud blazer would call forth a remark, and then she would forget what she had been speaking of. She had a bad memory for names, and it irritated her not to be able to think of them, so that she would pause in the middle of some story to rack her brains. Sometimes she had to give it up, but it often occurred to her afterwards, and when Philip was talking of something she would interrupt him. "Collins, that was it. I knew it would come back to me sometime. Collins, that's the name I couldn't remember." It exasperated him because it showed that she was not listening to anything he said, and yet if he was silent she reproached him for sulkiness. Her mind was of an order that could not deal for 5 minutes with the abstract, and when Philip gave way to his taste for generalising, she very quickly showed that she was bored. Mildred dreamt a great deal, and she had an accurate memory for her dreams, which she would relate every day with prolixity. One morning he received a long letter from Thorpe Athelny. He was taking his holiday in the theatrical way, in which there was much sound sense, which characterised him. He had done the same thing for 10 years. He took his whole family to a hop field in Kent, not far from Mrs. Athelny's home, and they spent 3 weeks hopping. It kept them in the open air, earned them money, much to Mrs. Athelny's satisfaction, and renewed their contact with Mother Earth. It was upon this that Athelny laid stress. The sojourn in the fields gave them a new strength. It was like a magic ceremony by which they renewed their youth and the power of their limbs and the sweetness of their spirit. Philip had heard him say many fantastic, rhetorical, and picturesque things on the subject. Now Athelny invited him to come over for a day. He had certain meditations on Shakespeare and the musical glasses which he desired to impart, and the children were clamouring for a sight of Uncle Philip. Philip read the letter again in the afternoon when he was sitting with Mildred on the beach. He thought of Mrs. Athelny, cheerful mother of many children with her kindly hospitality and her good humour; of Sally, grave for her years, with funny little maternal ways and an air of authority, with her long plait of fair hair and her broad forehead; and then in a bunch of all the others, merry, boisterous, healthy, and handsome. His heart went out to them. There was one quality which they had that he did not remember to have noticed in people before, and that was goodness. It had not occurred to him till now, but it was evidently the beauty of their goodness which attracted him. In theory he did not believe in it. If morality were no more than a matter of convenience, good and evil had no meaning. He did not like to be illogical, but here was simple goodness, natural and without effort, and he thought it beautiful. Meditating, he slowly tore the letter into little pieces. He did not see how he could go without Mildred, and he did not want to go with her. It was very hot, the sky was cloudless, and they had been driven to a shady corner. The baby was gravely playing with stones on the beach, and now and then she crawled up to Philip and gave him one to hold, then took it away again and placed it carefully down. She was playing a mysterious and complicated game known only to herself. Mildred was asleep. She lay with her head thrown back and her mouth slightly open. Her legs were stretched out and her boots protruded from her petticoats in a grotesque fashion. His eyes had been resting on her vaguely, but now he looked at her with peculiar attention. He remembered how passionately he had loved her, and he wondered why now he was entirely indifferent to her. The change in him filled him with dull pain. It seemed to him that all he had suffered had been sheer waste. The touch of her hand had filled him with ecstasy. He had desired to enter into her soul so that he could share every thought with her and every feeling. He had suffered acutely because, when silence had fallen between them, a remark of hers showed how far their thoughts had travelled apart, and he had rebelled against the unsurmountable wall which seemed to divide every personality from every other. He found it strangely tragic that he had loved her so madly and now loved her not at all. Sometimes he hated her. She was incapable of learning, and the experience of life had taught her nothing. She was as unmannerly as she had always been. It revolted Philip to hear the insolence with which she treated the hard-worked servant at the boarding-house. Presently he considered his own plans. At the end of his 4th year he would be able to take his examination in midwifery, and a year more would see him qualified. Then he might manage a journey to Spain. He wanted to see the pictures which he knew only from photographs. He felt deeply that El Greco held the secret of peculiar moment to him, and he fancied that in Toledo he would surely find it out. He did not wish to do things grandly, and on £100 he might live for 6 months in Spain. If Macalister put him on to another good thing, he could make that easily. His heart warmed at the thought of those old beautiful cities and the tawny plains of Castile. He was convinced that more might be got out of life than offered itself at present, and he thought that in Spain he could live with greater intensity. It might be possible to practise in one of those old cities. There were a good many foreigners, passing or resident, and he should be able to pick up a living. But that would be much later. First he must get 1 or 2 hospital appointments. They gave experience and made it easy to get jobs afterwards. He wished to get a berth as ship's doctor on one of the large tramps that took things leisurely enough for a man to see something of the places at which they stopped. He wanted to go to the East, and his fancy was rich with pictures of Bangkok and Shanghai and the ports of Japan. He pictured to himself palm trees and skies blue and hot, dark-skinned people, pagodas. The sense of the Orient intoxicated his nostrils. His heart but with passionate desire for the beauty and the strangeness of the world. Mildred awoke. "I do believe I've been asleep," she said. "Now then, you naughty girl, what have you been doing to yourself? Her dress was clean yesterday, and just look at it now, Philip." End of chapter 94. Recording by Tom Weiss, Tom'sAudiobooks.com.